I'm Scott Black, director of the Tanner Humanities Center, and I am delighted to introduce Cory Doctorow tonight. In the latest Martin Hench novel, set at the dawn of the personal computer age, a young Martin reflects getting people using computers, giving them the power to do more and do it together. It's, well, holy. I want to make a world where everyone who wants to can change their lives the way I have. The Reverend Sirs want everyone to have a computer too, but they want people to have one they control. I've read enough science fiction to know that a world where everyone depends on computers for everything, but a trio of religious maniacs have administrator access over all of them, is a very bad world. Martin immediately apologizes for his quip about religious maniacs, but his point isn't about the beliefs of the small group of monopolists. It's about power, about who controls the technology that structures our lives. In his science fiction, his journalism, and his activism, Cory Doctorow has devoted himself to that, yes, holy work of wrestling back control over the tools of the modern world from the forces that seek to control it, and so control us. Cory Doctorow is a science fiction author, activist, and journalist. He is the author of dozens of books, most recently Enshittification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It, and the novels Picks and Shovels, a follow-up to Red Team Blues. His other notable books include the solar punk novels Walkaway and The Lost Cause, the tech policy books The Internet Con and Choke Point Capitalism, and the internationally best-selling YA Little Brother series. His next book is The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI, due in the spring. He maintains a daily blog at pluralistic.net. He works for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is an A.D. White professor at Cornell University, an MIT Media Lab research affiliate, a visiting professor of computer science at Open University, a visiting professor of practice at the University of North Carolina's School of Library and Information Science. He co-founded the UK Open Rights Group. Born in Toronto, Canada, he now lives in Los Angeles and London. In 2020, he was inducted into the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame. In 2022, he earned the Sir Arthur Clarke Imagination in Service to Society Award for Lifetime Achievement. In 2024, the Media Ecology Association awarded him the Neil Postman Award for Career Achievement in Public Intellectual Activity. York University in Canada made him an honorary Doctor of Laws, and the Open University in the UK made him an honorary Doctor of Computer Science. After his lecture, Cory Doctorow will answer questions. Please enter them in the Q&A feature on the webinar. And then he was scheduled to sign books. However, obviously that's not going to happen on Zoom. However, Weller Books will have Cory's books available for sale. If you would like him to inscribe something, he'd be happy to personalize your purchase. That link is available in the chat. And after the talk, I have a few announcements about some excellent, exciting new events coming up on the Tanner. Thanks. Welcome, Cory.
Oh, well,
Virtual
thank you.
applause.
Oh, thank you very much. Before I start, I just want to confirm you can hear me. Can you just let me know? Do you hear me? Okay, I see lots of thumbs rising. Very good. Hi, everyone. Well, thank you for tuning in tonight on the Zoom. I'm sorry I can't see you all in person. Some of you, I suppose, I'll see tomorrow when I'm on campus. Now, I know tonight I was supposed to be talking about decaying tech platforms, but before I get to the tech platforms, I want to talk about nurses. So in January 2025, the Groundwork Collaborative published a report that documented how increasingly nurses in America are hired through gig apps. These apps all call themselves Uber for nursing. And the nurses never know from one day to the next how much they're going to get paid for their shift. There's something high tech going on here with the wages of those nurses. The nursing apps, a cartel dominated by three companies, ShiftMed, ShiftKey, and CareRev, they play all kinds of games with the wages of those nurses. Before ShiftKey offers a nurse a shift, it purchases that nurse's credit history from a data broker. Specifically, the company is paying to find out how much credit card debt the nurse is carrying and whether that debt is overdue. And the more desperate the nurse's financial straits are, the lower the wage that nurse is offered, because the more desperate you are, the less you will accept to come in and do the grunt work of caring for the sick and the elderly and the dying. Now, there are lots of things going on here, and obviously they're all terrible. What's more, they are emblematic of enshittification. That's the word I coined to describe the decay of online platforms. And when I first started writing about enshittification, I focused on the external symptoms of companies as they enshittified. I described a three-stage process. In stage one, platforms are good to their end users, but they're finding a way to lock those end users in. Think of Google. In the start, it minimized ads and it maximized spending on engineering for excellent search results, even as Google was buying its way to dominance, bribing every product or service that had a search box to wire that search box into Google's servers. So no matter what browser you were using, no matter what operating system you were using, no matter which mobile operating system you used, no matter which carrier you used, no matter which manufacturer made your device, you would be searching on Google by default. This got so crazy that by the mid-2020s, Google was spending enough to buy a whole ass Twitter every year or two just to make sure no one ever tried a search engine that wasn't Google's. Now that's stage one. Be good to the end users, but lock the end users in. Stage two is when the platform, knowing that the end users are locked in and can't leave, starts to abuse those end users in order to tempt in business customers. Now, in Google's case, that was the advertisers and the publishers. An ever larger of Google's search results pages were given over to ads, which were marked with ever subtler, ever smaller, ever grayer labels. And Google used that commercial surveillance data to target ads to us on publishers' pages. So that's stage two. Things get worse for end users, but better for business customers. But those business customers, they also get locked into the platform. They become dependent on those customers that can't leave. And that's when it's time to bust out stage three of enshittification. This is where the platform, like Google, claws back all the value, leaving behind a homeopathic residue calculated to keep those end users locked in and business customers locked to those end users. This is when Google becomes enshittified. In 2019, Google had hit a turning point. Search had grown as much as it possibly could. More than 90% of us used Google for search, and we used the Google search box for everything. Any thought, any fool idle question that crossed our minds, we typed into a Google box. So how is Google going to grow? There were no more users left to become Google searchers. I mean, Google could raise 1 billion humans to maturity and hope they all became Google users. They called that product Google Classroom, and it's showing great promise, but it's going to take a decade to bear fruit, and investors want returns right away. So what was Google going to do? Well, thanks to internal memos published during 2024's monopoly trial against Google, we know what Google did. Google made search worse. They reduced the system's accuracy so that you had to search twice or 3 times or more to get your answer, which increased the number of ads they could show you. Meanwhile, Google entered into a secret, illegal, collusive arrangement with Meta that they called Jedi Blue to rig the ad market, to fix prices so that advertisers paid more but publishers got less. And this is how we get the enshittified Google of today, where every time you type in a search query, you get back a page with a blob of AI slop at the top, over 5 paid results, each tagged in the word with the word ad in 8.80% gray on white type, which is over 10 spammy links from SEO shovelware sites filled with more AI slop. And yet we keep still using Google because we are locked into Google. That is enshittification from the outside. A company is good to its end users, locks those users in, makes things worse for those end users, brings in business customers, locks them in, and then takes all the value for itself and turns the company into a giant pile of shit. That's enshittification, a tragedy in 3 acts. I started off focused on these outward signs of enshittification, but I think it's time we start talking about what's going on inside the companies, the things that make enshittification possible. What is the technical mechanism of enshittification? I call that mechanism twiddling. Digital businesses, after all, have infinite flexibility bequeathed to them by the marvelously flexible digital computers that they run on. And that means that firms can endlessly twiddle the knobs that control the fundamental aspects of their business, so that every time you interact with the digital business, everything is different. The prices, the costs, the search rankings, the recommendation criteria, because every app is making a call to the cloud to ask how it should perform at any moment. Which takes me back to those nurses. The scam, where you look up the nurse's debt load and then tighter the wage you offer them based on it in real time, that's just twiddling. It's something you can only do with cloud-connected computers. The bosses who are doing this, they're no more evil than the bosses of yore. These are just bosses that have better tools. Note that these aren't even tech bosses. They're healthcare bosses who happen to have some tech. Digitization, weaving cloud computing through a firm or a sector, enables the kind of twiddling that allows firms to shift value around from end users to business customers, from business customers back to end users, and eventually to themselves. And every sector is moving to the cloud, like nurses, which means enshittification is coming to every sector, like nursing. Now, before I go on, I think I've seen a little AV problem. It looks like maybe I'm not visible on your feed anymore, or that just might be my feed. But if one of the people hosting this wouldn't mind just taking a quick look at the AV settings and make sure that I'm still visible there, that would be great. Thank you. Now, the legal scholar Vina Dubal, she coined a term to describe the twiddling that suppresses the wages of debt-burdened nurses. She calls it algorithmic wage discrimination. And it follows the gig economy. The gig economy, after all, is a major locus of enshittification. It is the largest tear in the membrane that separates the cloud from the rest of the world. Gig work is work where your shitty boss is a shitty app and you aren't even allowed to call yourself an employee. Now, twiddling, that's just a crude trick done quickly. Any task that's simple but time-consuming is a prime candidate for automation. And this kind of wage theft would be unbearably tedious, labor-intensive, and expensive to perform manually. No 19th century warehouse full of guys with green eye shades slaving over ledgers could do this. You need digitization. You need the cloud. Twiddling nurses' hourly wages is a perfect example of the role that the cloud plays in enshittification. Because this kind of thing, it's not just bad for nurses, it's bad for patients too. Do we really think that paying nurses based on how desperate they are at a rate calculated to increase their desperation and thus decrease the wage they are willing to work for is going to result in nurses delivering the best care? Do you want your catheter inserted by a nurse on food stamps who drove an Uber until midnight the night before and skipped breakfast this morning so that they could make rent? This is why it's so foolish to say, if you're not paying for the product, you're the product. If you're not paying for the product, ascribes a mystical power to advertising-driven services. The power to bypass our critical faculties by surveilling us and data mining the resulting dossiers to locate our mental blind spots and weaponize them to get us to buy anything an advertiser is selling. In this formulation, we are made to be explicit in our own exploitation. By choosing to use free services, we invite that exploitation by surveillance capitalists who perfected a mind control ray powered by surveillance data that we voluntarily hand over to ad-driven services. The moral of the story is just go back to paying for services instead of unrealistically demanding that everything be free, and we will restore capitalism to its functional non-surveillance state because we will be customers and not products. This is why the surveillance capitalism hypothesis elevates companies like Apple to virtuous alternatives. Because Apple is charging us money rather than attention, it can focus on giving us better service rather than exploiting us. Now, there is a superficial and plausible logic to this. After all, in 2022, Apple updated its iOS operating system, which runs iPhones and its other mobile devices, to include a tick box that allowed you to opt out of third-party surveillance from companies like Facebook. 96% of Apple's customers ticked that box. The other 4% were presumably drunk or Facebook employees, or I think probably drunk Facebook employees, which makes sense because if I worked for Facebook, I would be drunk all the time. So on the face of it, it seems like Apple is treating its customers like, it seems like Apple is not treating its customers like the product. But simultaneously, as they were rolling out this privacy measure, Apple was secretly turning on its own surveillance system that runs on iPhones and other iPhone-like devices, which spies on them in exactly the same way that Facebook used to, for exactly the same purpose, to target ads to you based on the places you've been, the things you've searched for, the communications you've had, and the links you've clicked. Apple did not ask its customers for permission to spy on them. It did not let them opt out of the spying. It did not tell them about the spying, and when it got caught, Apple lied about the spying. Now, it goes without saying that $1,000 distraction rectangle in your pocket that you bought from Apple, it's something you paid for. The fact that you paid for it does not stop Apple from treating you like the product. Apple treats its business customers, the app vendors, like the product. It scrapes 30 cents out of every dollar that you pay in every app you use, with mandatory payment processing fees that amount to 1,000% more than Visa, MasterCard charge, themselves already extortionate monopolists. Apple also treats its end users, people who shell out $1,000 for a phone, like the product. It spies on them to help target ads to them. Apple treats everyone like the product. This is what's going on with our gig app nurses. The nurses are the product. The patients are the product. The hospitals are the product. In Enshittification, the product is anyone who can be productized. Fair and dignified treatment is not something you get as a customer loyalty perk in exchange for parting with money instead of attention. The nurses are the product, and they are being twiddled because they have been conscripted into the tech industry. So it's tempting to blame the cloud for this. But tech companies were not born enshittified. They spent years, sometimes decades, making pleasing products. If you're old enough to remember when Google launched, you will recall that at the outset, Google was magic. You could ask Jeeves questions for 1,000,000 years and never come up with answers as crisp, as useful, and as helpful as the ones you got from typing a few vague descriptors into a Google search bar. There's a reason we all switched to Google, why so many of us bought iPhones, why we joined our friends on Facebook. All of these services were born digital. They all could have been shittified at any time, but they didn't. Until they did, and then they all did it at once. Social factors are far more important than the mere technical specifications of a gadget. It's the difference between a system that warns you when you're about to drift out of your lane and a system that tells your insurer that you nearly drifted out of your lane so they can add $10 to your monthly premium. I believe that enshittification was not caused by technological changes, but by changes to our policy environment. Changes to the rules of the game made in living memory by named parties who were warned at the time about the likely outcomes of their actions and who are today very rich and respected and face no consequences nor accountability for their role in ushering in the Enshittification. They venture out into polite society without ever once wondering whether someone is wondering what size pitchfork they take. In other words, my thesis is that we created an enshittigenic environment, a perfect breeding pool for the most pathogenic practices in our society that have therefore multiplied, dominating decision making at our firms and in our governments, leading to a vast enshitting of everything. And you know what? I think there's some good news there. Because if enshittification is not the result of a new kind of evil person, or the great forces of history bearing down on this moment to turn everything to shit, but rather, if enshittification is the result of specific policy choices, then we can reverse those policy choices. We can make better ones. We can emerge from the Enshittificene, consigning the Enshitternet to the scrap heap of history, a mere transitional stage between the old good internet we used to have and the new good internet we deserve. So let's talk about the kind of corporation we get when we create the enshittigenic environment. All firms want to maximize profits. The most profit maximizing strategy goes like this. Pay zero for your inputs, charge infinity for your outputs. But unless you're an academic publisher, that won't work for you. You won't make any money for the obvious reasons that none of us would buy what you're selling and no one would work for you at the wages you're paying. These constraints, they act as disciplining forces. They tamp down that urge to charge infinity and pay nothing. Now in tech, we have 4 of these constraints. These are anti-enshittificatory sources of discipline that make products and services better, pay workers more, and keep executives and shareholders' wealth from growing at the expense of customers, suppliers, and labor. The first of those constraints is markets. All other things being equal, businesses that charge more and deliver less lose customers to firms that are more generous about sharing value with workers, customers, and suppliers. This is the bedrock of capitalist theory. It is the ideological basis for antitrust law. Now, the first antitrust law was 1890's Sherman Act, whose sponsor, Senator John Sherman, brother of Tecumseh Sherman, stumped for it on the Senate floor saying, "If we would not endure a king as a political power, we should not endure a king over the production, transportation, and sale of the necessaries of life. If we would not submit to an emperor, we should not submit to an autocrat of trade with the power to prevent competition and fix the price of any commodity." Senator Sherman was reflecting the outrage of the anti-monopolist movement of the 1890s, when proprietors of monopolistic firms assumed the role of dictators, with the power to decide who would work, who would starve, what could be sold, and what it would cost. Lacking competitors, they became too big to fail, and thus too big to jail, and thus too big to care. So what happened to that disciplining force of competition? Well, we killed it. Starting about 45 years ago, the Reaganomic views of the Chicago School of Economics transformed the practice of antitrust. The Chicago School threw out John Sherman's idea that we need to keep companies competitive to prevent the autocrats of trade, and they installed a new idea that monopolies are efficient, and they did this around the world. In the US, in the UK, in the EU, and all across Asia. In other words, if Google had a 90% search market share, which it does, then we must infer from this that Google is the best search engine ever, and moreover, the best search engine possible, and that the only reason a better search engine hasn't stepped in is that Google is so skilled, so efficient, that there is no conceivable way to improve on it. We can tell that Google is the best because it has a monopoly, and we can tell that it has a good monopoly because Google is the best. So 45 years ago, the US and its major trading partners adopted an explicitly pro-monopoly policy, and after that, we got monopolies. Monopolies in pharma and beer and glass bottles and vitamin C and athletic shoes and microchips and cars and mattresses and eyeglasses and, of course, professional wrestling. The economists who conceived of these policies are still around today, polishing their fake Nobel Prizes, teaching at elite schools, making millions consulting for blue chip firms. And when we confront them with the wreckage that their policies created, they protest their innocence, maintaining with a straight face that there is no way to affirmatively connect pro-monopoly policies with monopolies. It's like we used to put down rat poison, and we didn't have a rat problem. And then these guys made us stop putting down rat poison. And now rats are eating our faces off, and they're making these wide, innocent eyes and saying, how can you be sure that our anti-rat poison policies are somehow connected to the epidemic of rats? Maybe we have simply arrived at the time of the rat. Maybe the iron laws of economics have dictated that rats will become more fecund than at any time in human history. And sure, the rats did buy the rat poison factories and shut them all down, but what of it? In an era in which you are not using rat poison, getting rid of the rat poison factories, well, that's economically rational. You might even call it Pareto optimal. Markets don't discipline tech because tech companies don't compete with their rivals. They buy them. That is a quote from a tech leader, Mark Zuckerberg. Quote, "It is better to buy than to compete." Which is why Mark Zuckerberg bought Instagram for $1 billion at a time when the company only had 12 employees and 25 million users. As he wrote in a spectacularly ill-advised middle-of-the-night email to his CFO, he had to buy Instagram because Facebook users were leaving Facebook to become Instagram users. And by buying Instagram, Zuck ensured that anyone who left Facebook, the platform, would remain a user of Facebook, the company. And despite the fact that Mark Zuckerberg put this confession in writing, something as culpable as saying, hey, Bob, you know that guy we were going to kill, just so you know, it's definitely a murder. And now that I think about it, I am premeditating it. Despite this, the Obama administration let Facebook go ahead with that acquisition because every government of every political stripe for 40 years adopted the posture that monopolies were efficient. Now, think again about those twiddled and immiserated nurses. Hospitals, well, that's one of the most consolidated sectors we have in the United States. First, they deregulated pharma mergers, and pharma companies gobbled each other up at the rate of knots, and they jacked up the price of drugs. So hospitals, then they had to merge to monopoly as a defensive maneuver that would allow hospital chains to corner the majority of a region or a city and say to pharma companies, either you make your drugs cheaper or we're not going to give them to any of the patients at any of the hospitals in town. Of course, once that mission was accomplished, the hospitals turned around and put the screws to the insurers, who staged their own incestuous orgy, buying and merging until most Americans have just one or two insurance options, which did let the insurers fight back against the hospitals. But it left patients and healthcare workers defenseless against the consolidated power of hospitals, pharma companies, pharmacy benefit managers, pharma wholesalers, group purchasing organizations, and other health industry cartels, duopolies, and monopolies, which is why nurses end up signing to work for hospitals who use those ghastly apps. Meanwhile, on the patient side, competition has never exercised discipline on the healthcare system. No one has ever shopped around for a cheaper hospital or a cheaper ambulance or a better ER while they were having a heart attack. And the price people are willing to pay to not die is all the money we have. So you have this sector that has no business being a commercial enterprise in the first place, losing what little discipline they faced from competition, paving the way for enshittification. But as I said, there are four forces that discipline companies. And the second of these forces It's the discipline by states. It's regulation. Now, it's a mistake to see market discipline and state discipline as two entirely separate realms. They are two sides of the same coin. They are intimately connected because competition is a necessary precondition for effective regulation. Even if you are the kind of Musk-addled libertarian who can no longer open your copy of Atlas Shrugged because the pages are stuck together, who pines for markets in human kidneys and demands the right to sell yourself into slavery, you should still want a robust antitrust regime so that contracts can be enforced. When a sector cartelizes, when it collapses into oligarchy, when the internet turns into 5 giant websites, each filled with screenshots of text from the other 4, then that sector captures its regulators. After all, a sector with 100 competing companies, it's a rabble. It's at each other's throats. They can't agree on anything, especially on how they're going to lobby. When a sector of 5 companies, or 4, or 3, or 2, or 1, that's a cartel. It's a racket. It's a conspiracy in waiting. A sector that has been boiled down to a mere handful of firms can agree on a common lobbying position. And what's more, they are insulated from wasteful competition. They are a slosh in cash, and they can mobilize that cash to turn their regulatory preferences into regulations. I'm going to pause for a minute again. I think the slides didn't loop at the end. Maybe we could restart them. And it also still looks like I'm not on the screen, although again, that might just be my end. I'll leave the AV folks to try and figure that out. So in other words, a cartel can capture its regulators. Now, regulatory capture, that might seem very abstract and technical, but it's quite concrete. Like, let's go back to those nurses. There are plenty of regulatory captures instances lurking in that example, but I'm just going to pick the most egregious one. The fact that there are data brokers who will sell you information about the credit card debts of any American. Now, this is because the US Congress hasn't passed a new consumer privacy law since 1988. That's when Ronald Reagan signed a law called the Video Privacy Protection Act that bans video store clerks from disclosing your VHS rental habits. The fact that Congress hasn't updated Americans' privacy rights since Die Hard was in theaters is not a coincidence, and it's not an oversight. It is the expensively purchased inaction of a heavily concentrated and thus wildly profitable privacy invasion industry that has monetized the abuse of human rights at unimaginable scale. The coalition in favor of keeping privacy law frozen keeps growing because there is an unbounded set of ways to transform the systematic invasion of our human rights into cash. There is a direct line from this phenomenon to nurses whose paychecks go down when they can't pay their credit card bills. So competition died, regulation died, and companies stopped being disciplined by markets and states. But there are 4 forces that discipline tech firms, contributing to the inhospitable environment for the reproduction of sociopathic and shittifying monsters. So let's talk about the remaining 2 forces. Now, the first of them, it's interoperability. That's the principle of 2 or more things working together. Like, you can put anyone's shoelaces in your shoes. You can put anyone's gas in your gas tank. You can put anyone's light bulbs in your light socket. Now, in the non-digital world, it takes a lot of work. To make a light bulb that works in any light socket, you have to agree on the direction, the pitch, and the diameter of the thread. You have to agree on the voltage, the amperage, and the wattage of the socket. Or the next time someone changes a light bulb, they're going to get their hand blown off. But in the digital world, interop is built in because there is only one kind of computer we know how to make, the Turing-complete universal von Neumann machine, a computing machine capable of calculating every computable problem. This means that for any enshittifying program, there is a counter-enshittificatory program waiting to be run. When HP writes a program to ensure that your printer rejects generic ink, someone else can write a program to disable that checking. Now, here in the US, there's a company called Para. They shipped an app called DoorDash, they shipped an app to help DoorDash employees get paid more. You see, DoorDash drivers, they call them dashers. They make most of their money on tips. And the DoorDash driver app hides the tip amount until you accept the job, meaning you don't know if you're accepting a job that pays $1.50 or $11.50 with the tip until you commit to taking it. So Para, they made an app that extracts the tip amount and shows it to the dasher before they clock on. But DoorDash shut that app down because here in America, apps like Para are illegal. In 1998, Bill Clinton signed a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and Section 1201 of the DMCA makes it a felony to bypass an access control for a copyrighted work and establishes penalties of a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine for a first offense. So just the act of reverse engineering an app like the DoorDash app is potentially a felony, which is why companies are so desperately horny to get you to use their apps instead of their websites. The web is open. Apps are closed. The majority of web users have installed an ad blocker, which also protects your privacy. But no one installs ad blockers for apps because it is a felony to distribute an ad blocker for an app because you have to reverse the app to make it. An app is just a website skinned in the right kind of IP so that the company that made it can send you to prison if you dare to protect your privacy at the expense of their shareholders. Around the world, we have enacted a thicket of laws that we call IP laws that make it illegal to modify products or services or devices so that they serve your interests rather than the interests of the shareholders of the company that made them. And like I said, these are laws that were enacted in living memory by people who are still among us, who are warned about the obvious and foreseeable consequences of their reckless plans and who did it anyway. In Europe, they adopted their own version of this law in 2001 at the insistence of the US Trade Representative. It's Article 6 of the Copyright Directive, and it copy-pastes the Digital Millennium Copyright Act's anti-circumvention section onto Europe's statute books. Canada did the same thing in 2012 with Bill C-11, the Copyright Modernization Act. Experts warned leaders that laws that ban tampering with digital locks would allow American giants to corner digital markets, forcing the people in those countries to buy their apps and games from American app stores that would cream off any commission they chose to levy. They warned their lawmakers that these laws were gifts to monopolists who could jack up the price of ink, that these copyright laws, far from serving artists, would lock them to American platforms, because every time someone in the audience for an artist buys a song or a game or a video that is locked into an American app, it could never be unlocked. So if the creative workers tried to migrate to a domestic store, one that might pay them a better rate, their audience wouldn't come with them. They couldn't move their purchases out of that American app to a local one. Now, politicians ignored them, and all over the world, it became illegal to tamper with a digital lock. So if the company puts a digital lock on its product, they can do anything behind that lock, and it becomes a crime to change how the program works. For example, when HP puts a digital lock on its printers that verifies you're not using generic ink cartridges or refilling an HP cartridge, it becomes a crime to bypass that lock to use third-party ink, which is how HP has gotten away with ratcheting up the price of ink over and over again until printer ink has become the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian without a special government permit. The colored water costs $10,000 a gallon, which means that you are printing out your grocery lists with a substance that costs more than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion. That is the world the U.S. Trade Representative delivered. A world where farmers cannot fix their tractors and independent mechanics cannot fix your car, where hospitals during the pandemic lockdowns couldn't service their failing ventilators, where every time an iPhone user buys an app from a local vendor, every dollar they spend takes a round trip through Cupertino, California, and comes back 30 cents lighter. Now, interoperability, it was a major disciplining force on tech firms. After all, if you make the ads on your website sufficiently obnoxious, some fraction of your users will install an ad blocker and you will never earn another penny from them because no one in the history of computing ever voluntarily uninstalled their ad blocker. But once it's illegal to make an ad blocker, there's no reason to make the ads as disgusting, invasive, and obnoxious as you can to shift all the value from end users to shareholders and executives. So we get monopolies. And monopolies capture their regulators, and that means they get to ignore the laws they don't like and prevent laws that might interfere with their predatory conduct, like privacy laws, from being passed. And they get new laws passed, laws that let them wield governmental power that prevent other companies from entering the market. So 3 of our 4 forces are neutralized. We lost competition, we lost regulation, and we lost interoperability. And that left just one force holding enshittification at bay. And that force was labor. Tech workers are a strange sort of workforce because historically they were very powerful. They were able to command very high wages and respect, but they did it without unionizing. Union density in tech is abysmal. It's almost undetectable. Tech workers' power didn't come from solidarity. It came from scarcity. There just weren't enough workers to fill those jobs that were going begging, and those jobs were extraordinarily productive for employers. Employers were making $1 million or more per engineer on their payroll. Tech bosses pulled out all the stops to motivate a workforce to work on the projects they believed in for endless hours. But the minute bosses ordered them to enshittify the products they'd missed their mother's funerals to ship on deadline, the workers told their bosses to go to hell. And if the bosses persisted in demanding that they enshittify those products, well, the workers could walk off the job, cross the street, and get a better job the same day. So for many years, workers were the fourth and final constraint, holding the line where the constraints of competition, regulation, and interoperability had failed. But then came the mass tech layoffs. We've had 500,000 since 2023. Facebook last year perpetrated a 5% headcount massacre while doubling its executives' bonuses. Tech workers do not tell their bosses to go to hell anymore because there are 10 other workers at the factory gates waiting to have their job. Ever wonder why tech bosses are so horny for AI? It's because it lets them think that they can fire tech workers and replace them with chatbots who'll never tell them to go to hell. So that's where enshittification comes from. Multiple changes to the policy environment, the fourfold collapse of competition, regulation, interoperability, and worker power created the enshittigenic environment where the greediest, most sociopathic elements in the body corporate thrived at the expense of those elements that acted as moderators of their enshittificatory impulses. And until we fix that environment, the contagion will spread to other firms. So let's talk about where the hostile environment for enshittifiers will come from. We're not going to solve this problem entirely so long as the profit motive is intact. There will always be people whose pursuit of profit is pathological, unmoderated by any shame or decency. But we can change the policy environment so those people don't dominate our technology or our lives. Now, I've been doing this work for 24 years now at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. And for 24 years, it felt like I was throwing myself at a door that was double locked and deadbolted. And now I see that that door has opened a crack. And I have to tell you, I am hopeful. I'm not optimistic. I don't believe in optimism. Optimism is the idea that things will get better no matter what we do. I know what we do matters. Instead of having optimism, I have hope. Hope is the belief that what we do matters. That if we can improve things, even in small ways, we will ascend a gradient towards the world that we want. And as we attain each higher vantage point, we will see new courses of action invisible to us when we were at the lower elevation. So hope is a discipline, and it requires that you not give in to despair. So I'm here to tell you, don't despair. All this decade, all over the world, countries took up arms against concentrated corporate power. We have had big, muscular antitrust attacks on corporations in the US under the first Trump administration and under Biden, in Canada, in the UK, in the EU, and in EU member states like Germany, France, and Spain, in Australia and Japan and South Korea and Singapore and Brazil, and in China. This is a near miraculous turn of affairs. All over the world, governments declared war on monopolies, the source of billionaires' wealth and power. Now, even the most forceful wind is invisible until something gets in its way. We can only see how hard the wind is blowing by its effects. And what we're seeing here is that whenever any politician bent on curbing corporate power unfurls even the smallest sail, no matter where in the world that politician is, that sail fills with air and propels that policy in ways that haven't been seen in generations. The long becalming of the fight over corporate power has ended. We have left the doldrums because a fierce, unstoppable wind is blowing. It's not just blowing in Canada or in Europe or in South Korea or Japan or China or Australia or Brazil. It's also blowing here in America. Never forget that as screwed up and terrifying as things are in America, this country has experienced and continues to experience a tsunami of antitrust bills and enforcement actions at the state and local level, as well as at the federal level. And never forget, disenshittifying America will be good for Americans because in our K-shaped, bifurcated, unequal America, the trillions that Americans' companies loot from the world, they don't trickle down to us Americans. The average American holds a portfolio of assets that rounds to zero, and that includes stock in U.S. tech companies. The average American is not a shareholder in big tech. The average American is a victim of big tech. Liberating the world from U.S. big tech is also liberating America from big tech. That has been EFF's mission for 35 years, and it's been my mission at EFF for 24 years. I want you to get involved in this fight, and I hope you do. It can be your mission too. You can join EFF at EFF.org. You can get involved in mutual aid groups. You can buy a whistle and blow it to warn your neighbors of mass thugs who come to shoot them in the head or kidnap them to a Salvadoran slave labor camp. You can join a union, and if your workplace isn't unionized, you can start a union. Now, it's true that Trump illegally fired so many members of the National Labor Relations Board that the board can no longer form a quorum and enforce its actions. But Trump made a serious mistake there. He thinks that unions exist because there's a union law that protects them. But that's exactly backwards. The law exists because unions, illegal unions, demanded that law. Labor law was won by workers in illegal unions, and it passed because bosses were so scared of those workers that they sued for a labor peace in the force of labor militancy. And labor laws, like the National Labor Relations Act, they come in two parts. One part is about all the things your boss isn't allowed to do to you, but the other part, it's about all the things you're not allowed to do to your boss. And I'll give you one guess which part has seen the most vigorous enforcement. Trump thinks when you fire the refs, you cancel the game. But a real player knows that when you fire the refs, it means you throw out the rule book. Last month, our comrades in Minneapolis led an illegal, wildly successful general strike, the first in America in generations. And it won't be the last. Join a union or start a union. And if you're a tech worker, start a tech union. Start by reaching out to Tech Solidarity and the Tech Workers Coalition. The door is open to crack. The wind is blowing. People are ready for change. They want a new good world with a new good internet, one that delivers all the technological self-determination of the old good internet and the ease of use of Web 2.0, so our normie friends can use it too. And I can't wait for all of us to get to hang out there because it's going to be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Cory.
Oh,
That
thank
was
you.
excellent. I invite, and actually you can see the applause. I'll give you a chance
Yeah,
to
I
take it
can.
in.
Thank
You
you.
can
It's very nice. Thank you.
hear it with your eyes. If you would like to ask Cory a question, there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar. There are a couple already in there. I'm going to read them out to you, Cory, unless you'd like
Yeah,
to read them
thank you.
yourself. I think that's
No, I
probably the
can't.
easiest.
My laptop's quite a distance away from me here. We've got a
Okay.
bit of an odd last minute AV set up here in the hotel. So
Okay. The first question is from Pete Ashdown, who you may or may not remember. Cory, I'm
Mhm.
sorry your talk got enshittified by Zoom, or by the weather, I suppose. This is Pete Ashdown. You gave a boost to my US Senate campaign when I was more optimistic about the internet 20 years ago. We've seen more calls for regulation of AI, including Hillary Clinton this week. My question is whether this is possible or not. I have an AI that I can run on my desk, completely independent of the internet. I fear that AI will not directly kill us, but enshittify our minds. And really, there is little we can do other than to take a page out of the Luddite movement.
Hmm. Well, boy, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, the first thing to know, since you invoked the Luddites, is that the Luddites didn't dislike technology. The Luddites were skilled technologists. To be a textile worker, you needed to do a 7-year apprenticeship using the most advanced technology of the age. Being a textile worker in the time was like getting a master's degree in engineering from MIT. And so the Luddites didn't dislike technology. They just disliked the social relations of technology. They disliked the fact that their bosses, the factory owners, were buying new machines that were billed as being so easy a child could use them. And the reason that mattered is because they were kidnapping children from Napoleonic war orphanages in London and taking them to the dark satanic mills of Manchester to be indentured for 10 years, during which they were routinely maimed and beaten and starved. So it wasn't like they were angry at technology. They were angry at looms that produced inferior materials at an enormous human cost to the benefit of a small group of people. And they had widespread public support. And the fact that they were so horribly defeated is testified to by the fact that we think of Luddites as anti-technology cowards and not as workers organized around human rights. At the time, it wasn't the case. There was a famous child who was kidnapped to one of the factories, Robert Blinko, who, after his indenture was finished after 10 years, wrote a memoir about his life inside the factories. It was such a bestseller that it changed the way people thought about what was going on in the factories. And one person it really affected was a guy named Charles Dickens, who based a book called Oliver Twist on it. Oliver Twist is Luddite fanfic. Mary Shelley was very sympathetic to the Luddites. Frankenstein is a Luddite allegory about what happens when you let inventors roll out technology without listening to the people around them and thinking about the social consequences. Lord Byron's maiden speech in the Lords was a pro-Luddite speech. So never let them tell you that the Luddites were anti-technology. The Luddites were very into technology. They just wanted good technology. You might call them early anti-enshittifiers, not early technophobes. Now, on to AI. There's a lot of different things we need to say about AI, and I could honestly spend the rest of the Q&A doing this. I have a book coming out in June called The Reverse Centaur's Guide to Life After AI that kind of sets this out in detail. But the first thing I want to say is, in many ways, AI is just not real. We're talking about a technology that has spent $600 to $700 billion in capital expenditure thus far, whose progenitors say that they're going to spend $2 to $3 trillion in the coming years on it. And yet, by their own account, they make like $60 billion a year worldwide on this technology. That's gross revenues, not net profits. That number is grossly inflated as well. 10 billion out of that 60 billion, that's the 10 billion that OpenAI got from Microsoft and gave back to Microsoft. That is not revenue. Calling that revenue is doing great violence to the noble accounting trick, and so, you've got this industry that's making $50 billion a year, and it's going to have to recoup at least $700 billion, if not $2.7 trillion. How long do they have to do that at $50 billion a year? Well, they will tell you that their assets depreciate on a 5-year scale, but in private, they'll say that those GPUs burn out in 2.5 years or so. So they got 2.5 years at $50 billion a year to make $700 billion or possibly $3 trillion. Those numbers don't add up. And then you have the 7 companies that we call the Magnificent Seven for reasons that are closely related to why we think of Luddites as being technophobes, because they are magnificent in the same way that Luddites were afraid of technology. Those 7 companies are passing around the same $100 billion IOU really fast and pretending it's in all of their bank accounts at once. Again, that's just not real. We had money-losing technology before that changed the world, like the web, but the web had great unit economics. Every user you added to the web made the web cheaper to use and made more money for the company. Every generation of the web was cheaper to deploy and more profitable. That's not AI. Every user who uses AI loses money for the AI company. The more they use AI, the more the AI company loses. Every GPU an AI company buys costs them money. The AI companies that have lost the least money from their GPUs are the ones who got so excited that they bought GPUs before finding a place to plug them in. And now those GPUs are just sitting in a warehouse. If they ever figure out how to plug in those GPUs, they're going to lose a hell of a lot more money on those GPUs. So just like remember that, right? Even if you are getting value out of AI, and I will stipulate that many people get value out of AI. I've got a post coming up tomorrow about how I run a model on my laptop called Olama that I use as a typo checker, and I get value out of it. The amount of value I get out of it in terms of cash value rounds to about zero. I would pay maybe $25 for this lifetime. Some people are paying $25 a month for AI. Some people are even paying a couple $100 a month for AI. The AI companies are losing thousands of dollars on those users. So even if you feel like you're getting great value for money at $200 a month with Claude Code, ask yourself whether you would still be getting great value for money if it was $2,000 a month. And then think about what happens if 90% of Claude Code users nope out of giving $2,000 a month to Claude Code, so that the cost of amortizing all those GPUs goes to $20,000 a month for you, and ask whether you'd be willing to pay $20,000 a month. You know, in finance, they say anything that can't go on forever eventually stops. So the fact that you can deliver something that people think is worth $200 a month by spending $2,000 a month is not all that surprising. If you want, I could do that for you. You could write me a check for $2,000 a month, and I'd give you back $200 every month for as long as you'd like. I'd give you $300. I would beat the margins of the AI companies by 50% if you wanted. So whenever we talk about what AI can and can't do, we need to start there, right? That there is a coming economic collapse that is going to make 2008 look like the best day of your life. And the sooner the bubble pops, the fewer real things it will destroy. And then we can think about, you know, what AI can and can't do, what it'll look like after the bubble. I think that claims of AI being a mind control ray are grossly inflated. I think ad tech companies have been claiming to have a mind control ray forever. I think their credulous opponents have repeated it. It's something that the technology critic Lee Vinsel calls critihype. When you repeat someone's marketing claims as criticism, like, you know, look at these terrible tech bros, they can do mind control, which then turns into, why should you pay extra for ads on my platform? Well, if you ask my critics, they'll tell you I can do mind control. Everyone who ever claimed to have a mind control ray was lying to themselves or lying to us or both. That's true of Rasputin and Mesmer, MK Ultra and pickup artists. It's true of AI companies, and it's true of ad tech companies too. Mind control is not real. What can AI do? Well, it's not going to turn into general intelligence. The idea that shoveling extra words into the word guessing program will make it intelligent is like the idea that if you keep breeding horses to run fast enough, eventually one of your mares will give birth to a locomotive. A human being is not a word guessing program that knows more words to guess with. We're a different kind of thing. You know, I'm a materialist. I'm willing to stipulate that someday we might make a machine that can think. I just don't think we'll make it using these techniques. And indeed, these techniques appear to be peaking out in terms of what they can do. So what's left after the bubble burst, which is going to happen at some point? Well, we'll have a lot of cheap GPUs at 10 cents on the dollar. Maybe you can make a profit on those once you've knocked 90% off the sale price. You have a lot of applied statisticians looking for work that you can hire on the cheap. And you're going to have these open source models, like the one that I'm running on my laptop, which doesn't even have a GPU, but can still check my text for typos that, you know, the grammar checker built into my word processor doesn't find. You know, those open source models, they've barely been touched. They were thrown over the wall by these big tech companies like Facebook, but they never bothered to optimize them because, you know, when you're trying to sucker in normie investors who don't understand your technology, and the heuristic that those investors use to assess the upside is the assumption that it is a factor of the investment. Therefore, the more you're investing, the more it costs to make the AI, the more money the AI is going to make. Why would you ever bother to make the AI cheaper to run, right? The prospectus is grounded in the principle that a pile of shit of sufficient size must have a pony underneath it somewhere. And so every time someone starts to optimize these open source models, they get much better. The Chinese company DeepSeek put $20 million into optimizing an open source model from, I believe, Meta as well. And it was so effective running on low-end hardware that NVIDIA lost $1 trillion in market cap in one day. So I think that if you think about what you would do with powerful, useful open source models that can do things that under normal conditions we would just call a plugin, right? Like better grammar checking, better punctuation checking, better typo checking. That's a plugin for your word processor. It's not a reason to fire all your workers. So once we have this technology left, what can we do with it as a normal technology? And how can we disrupt the bubble as quickly as possible? Because even though the AI can't do your job, an AI salesman can definitely convince your boss to fire you and replace you with an AI that can't do your job, which means that we're heading into a world where people who do real things are replaced with AIs that do them badly, which are then going to go offline. And so when that happens, it's going to be disastrous. So that's my answer to your AI question.
Thank you. This is a question from Ian Jacobson. A lot of your critique of platform enshittification seems to challenge the idea that profit maximization should be the primary organizing principle of markets. Do you see your argument as a critique of capitalism itself or of how markets are currently structured and regulated? And if profit shouldn't be the dominant metric, what should replace or constrain it in economic policymaking?
Well, I don't believe that markets are the be-all and end-all or the best or only way to organize our outputs. But, as the noticed communist agitator Adam Smith put it, it's not from the generosity of the baker that we get our bread. It's from competition. So even if you believe in capitalism and profit maximization, you should also believe in competition, because it's competition that causes firms to discipline themselves and maximize profits, not by making things worse, but by making things better. In a competitive environment, people who make things worse lose money. And I think that, the most ardent proponents and spiritual fathers of capitalism were very alive to this. And the people who oriented themselves around replacing markets, Marx and Engels say, were extremely impressed by the productivity of capitalism under conditions of competition. If you read the first chapter of the Communist Manifesto, it's just Marx and Engels totally geeking out about how many amazing things capitalism has done and wondering about how they can get rid of its negative sides while preserving the productivity gains that have arisen from it. So, it's very weird that I, who is not a true believer in markets, have to go around and explain to people who claim to be capitalists that if you eliminate competition and regulation, if workers don't have any power, if you prevent new market entry by blocking interoperability, that you will get a form of capitalism that's very bad. Even if you like capitalism, this isn't the good capitalism, it's the shitty capitalism. I really find it very odd that I've had to go around and explain how capitalism works to self-described capitalists.
This is a question from Alexis Hovorka. I just started a PhD in computer science education, and one of the big questions I've been wrestling with is what is the why of teaching computer science in a world that looks like this? What do you think I should be preparing to teach my students? Obviously ethics, but what else?
So I would focus on reverse engineering, adversarial interoperability. The great power of a computer scientist, the thing that makes them a fully operational battle station is this Turing completeness. It's the fact that every enshittified program has a disenshittifying program waiting to be created and added on top of it. And when you teach people to reverse engineer, when you teach people how to understand the workings of the program and to do battle with the people who made it, you teach them to seize the means of computation. You teach them to help themselves and the people around them to liberate themselves from the venal impulses of the people who made their technology. It's a very powerful lesson. And I even have some texts to suggest to you. So Bunnie Huang, Huang, Bunnie is Bunnie. He's PhD Eng from MIT, He was our client at the Electronic Frontier Foundation when, as a grad student, he broke the DRM on the Xbox and figured out how to install Linux on it, and Microsoft came after him. And he's written a string of excellent books. The first is an open access book called Hacking the Xbox. He's also written a book called The Reverse Engineer, and he's written a book called Hardware Hacking. And any one of them, but all three, make for just stunning reading about the philosophy, the intellectual joy, the liberatory power of reverse engineering. And I think that if you teach people to hack the apps that imprison them for themselves and for the people around them, that you are teaching them where the sources of power lie in computers, and that's the reason to teach computer science.
Quick question from an anonymous attendee. So what tools do you use to find information on the internet?
So I use a search engine that is, it's got a funny story and a funny name. It's called Kagi, Kagi, Kagi.com. The editor for my novels, he just retired, but he's this wonderful fella named Patrick Nielsen Hayden, who's one of these autodidacts. And I'm sure you all know someone like this. He dropped out of high school, became a very powerful editor in New York, became a vice president at Macmillan, but taught himself a million things about a million subjects. And there's nothing that he isn't interesting and erudite on. And as is his wife, Teresa, who has more traditional education, but also is an autodidact. And so when they talk about their research ideas, I take a lot of notice. They left New York during the pandemic and moved back to Tucson. And I was staying with them during the Tucson Writers Festival. And we were doing what people like us always do of a morning. We had our faces in our computers, drinking coffee. And Patrick, out of the blue, said, "Have you tried Kagi yet?" And I'm like, "Well, what's Kagi?" And he said, "Well, it's a search engine, but it's like using Google when Google started. It's a miracle. You just type in words and you get the thing you're looking for." So it cost $10 a month to use. They had 100 free searches to try it out. I tried it for like 5 minutes and immediately subscribed for my whole family. And I was just happily using it. And then I read an article by Jason Kebler, who's one of the founders and writers at 404 Media. Used to be the editor-in-chief at Motherboard when Vice was still going. And it was about Kagi. And he revealed something I did not know or suspect, and wouldn't have guessed in a million years, which is that Kagi licenses Google's index. So they're just a kind of sorting algorithm on top of Google's index. And this like group of like whatever 30 engineers I think they have is able to produce better Google search results than Google is, which tells you a lot about Google, right? Google has hired a plurality of the computational linguists, computer scientists, and data scientists that have graduated from the top universities all over the world for a quarter of a century. If Google can't do better than that, then they don't want to. So I really like Kagi. I don't have anything to do with them commercially. I don't have any contact with them. Periodically, I'll get an email from the CEO thanking me when I say stuff like this, but I pay for my subscription like you and me. So it's an endorsement, but it's not a paid endorsement. They're not like pals of mine or anything. And then, to keep track of things, I don't use algorithmic feeds. I use an old and wonderful technology called RSS. Again, it's one of these technologies that's a quarter of a century old. It was the dominant way that people found things, kept track of things on the internet until the early 2010s, when Google, which had made the most popular RSS program, just killed it. And then that more or less killed RSS. They just put it in its grave, which is, again, a danger of using even a very good technology from a single monopolistic company. RSS, it's just... It's a program that looks a lot like maybe your email client, where you see new messages in an inbox, except the things that are in the inbox are all the new articles that have been posted on any of the websites that you've asked it to follow. And most websites publish an RSS feed. They just don't advertise it. Some of them don't even know it. It just comes built into the web server software they're using. And you can track everything with RSS. You can track your favorite YouTubers. You can track your favorite accounts on Mastodon and Blue Sky. You can track your FedEx parcels and get an RSS alert when your FedEx parcel moves. RSS is great for tracking things that change all the time, and it's great for tracking things that change only very infrequently. Like I have a folder in my RSS reader of websites that almost never update, which means that I get an alert when people like my friend Danny O'Brien, who should blog much more often, updates his website. And so, yeah, it's a wonderful technology. It's free, it's open, there are multiple vendors. I use a reader. God, what is my reader called? It's called Oh yeah, News Blur. Again, perfectly happy with it. I've had it for more than 15 years. I think I paid $30 a year for it. It runs desktop and on your phone. It's fine. But you can use any one of a number of readers. And one of the cool things about RSS readers is when you're ready to switch to another reader, you just ask it to export the list of all your feeds, and it gives you a little file, and you open it in your new reader, and you're just following them all there. So if you don't like your reader, you can change it. So like use any reader. And if it sucks, just change. And like if there's two readers you like, use them for different kinds of feeds or different applications. In fact, you're probably already using an RSS reader and you don't know it, because podcasts are RSS feeds with MP3 enclosures, which means that whatever you're using to get your podcast is already a specialized RSS reader. And you could just do that for everything.
Thanks. This is from Bennett Davenport. Have tech executives and creatives always been this pathogenic, or have you seen a change in their behavior and who is allowed in these spaces that has increased enshittification?
So I think there's two things going on. The first is that a lot of these people had bad impulses, but they were interested in self-preservation, right? So, back to Adam Smith and the baker. The baker doesn't put rat poison in the bread, not because he doesn't hate you and want you to die. It's because he'll lose you as a customer. And so you have a lot of these guys like Mark Zuckerberg. I think he's always been a creep. My friend Sarah Wynne Williams was an executive at Facebook, and she wrote a memoir when she left called Careless People that was a bestseller last year, and that Facebook has sued her for in an arbitration court that's awarded them $111 million because she signed a non-disparagement contract that punishes her for $50,000 every time she says something mean about Facebook. She said a lot of mean things about Facebook in this book. All of them true, including the fact that Mark Zuckerberg cheats at Settlers of Catan. This is a guy who founded his company so that he could non-consensually rate the fuckability of Harvard undergraduates, right? This was never a good guy. But he made a better service because he was worried about us leaving. So in some cases, these people were always scum, but they were self-interested scum who were worried about losing our business, and their self-interest motivated them to act better. But then you have like the character of the institution itself. So if you imagine an institution as, riven by factions that contest with one another over the best course of action, those factions will represent some kind of distribution of views of the world. You'll have people who really care about their users. You have people who really care about money. You have people who are somewhere in between. Tech users, or tech workers are often people who really care about user welfare, because a lot of tech workers, their journey into the field was having technology open their horizons, right? They grew up in a small town. They didn't know the words to describe themselves or the ideas they felt. They find an online community, and it changes the possibilities for their life and the way they understand the world. And they want to share those benefits with everyone. We all know tech people who want to share the benefits with anyone. Ask your friend who uses Linux why you should use Linux, and then try and get them to shut up. Right? So we all know those people. They're Tron-pilled. They fight for the user, right? So these Tron-pilled workers are in the corner fighting. And if you think about Google, Google was like making $1 million per engineer. Those engineers could work anywhere else. They treated those engineers like tenured professors. Tenured professors circa 10 years ago, when tenured professors weren't getting fired for saying that there shouldn't be genocide in Palestine. They did that not because they liked them. It's pretty clear from the way Sergey Brin acts today that he never liked those people. He used to have these all hands meetings that he would attend, and he would just like wear a hoodie and let his engineers say impertinent things, and now he doesn't. They did a $80 billion stock buyback and a 12,000 person layoff in the same year, their first ever layoff. They could have paid those 12,000 workers for 27 years with the $80 billion they did in this stock buyback. So, it's pretty gnarly. When you look at the history of Google, I talk about this moment in 2019 where they had this fight about whether they should make Google search worse or better. And we learn about that from memos that the DOJ published that they requested through the discovery process in the antitrust case with Google. And Ed Zitron of the Where's Your Ed At newsletter reported these out and really dug into them. And in these memos, you get a kind of palimpsest of a factional infight within Google. And one side is led by this guy called Prabhagar Raghavan, who's a money guy. He's in charge of Google search revenue. He's trained as an engineer, but he came out of McKinsey. And he just wants to maximize revenue. And it's his idea to make search worse in order to increase revenue. And on the other side is this guy called Ben Gomes. And Ben Gomes is like this OG Googler. He has been building their servers since they were like under a desk at Stanford. He oversaw the build out of the global network of data centers. When we meet him, he's the head of search technology. So he's search tech boss. And in the emails back and forth, you have Ben Gomes being like palpably horrified at the idea of destroying this thing that he gave his life to. And you have Prabhakar Raghavan and his faction saying, like, why wouldn't we do this? We are bribing Apple $20 billion a year not to make a search engine. No one will ever find a search engine that's not Google. Why wouldn't we take advantage of the fact that we have spent all this money buying all the shelf space in the store to make the product worse? What are people going to do? Use Bing, right? And so because they know that nothing bad will happen as a result of doing bad, factionally, they win the fight in the firm. And, you know, you have these two different factions. It could have fallen the other way. I refuse to believe that 2019 is the first time a greedy person suggested something bad at Google, right? It's just that all of those people were shouted down by the good people who were able to say beyond, that would make me feel icky. They were able to say, something bad will happen to Google if we do it. Workers will quit. Well, okay, now we've got as many workers as we need. Regulators will punish us. Well, we've captured our regulators. Competitors will eat our lunch. Well, we don't have any more competitors, right? So once you have cleared all the obstacles to doing bad, the people who want to do bad within the firm will win the factional fights. And the impulses within individuals in the firm will win the wrestling matches within their conscience.
Thank you. I think one last question, and this
Sure.
is a big one. One of the
Okay.
stopgaps that you mentioned, this is an anonymous attendee. One of the stopgaps that you mentioned was bypassed to cause enshittification was the establishment of DMCA law globally. With the
Mhm.
rise of generative AI, specifically deepfakes and Sora, I've seen news here and there that there have been constant back and forths between corporations with intellectual property and AI companies as copyright lags severely behind, like much other
Mhm.
law. How do you think copyright law will change in the coming years as a result of the AI bubble?
Well, you know, here's something that I think a lot of my fellow creative workers don't like it when I say, but I don't think copyright law prohibits training a model. I think if you break down training a model into its component steps, it's pretty clear that they're all lawful under copyright. So, you know, making a transient copy of a work in order to perform mathematical analysis on it is canonically fair use, right? It's how we get search engines. If you want to like live in a world where the last search engine we get is Google, just require a license to scrape, and Google will be the only company that can pay that license, right? And we'll never get another search engine, and they will dominate and destroy our lives forever. I don't think it's wrong. I think, you know, overburdening servers is wrong, and we can figure out some good policies about that. But the act of making a transient copy of a work is fine. Performing the mathematical analysis on the work, also fine, right? It's like it's not even in the realm of copyright. Now, you may have seen that Anthropic settled this big lawsuit, and I'm going to get money from it for getting these pirate ebooks and then using their text to train a model. And from that, you may have inferred that Anthropic was stipulating that it was illegal to count the words in the books, which is what training a model is. And that's not what they're stipulating. They're stipulating that downloading the pirate ebooks is illegal, and that's not a very controversial position. If you go to a flea market and buy a pirate CD and then make a list of all the adverbs used in the lyrics and then count how many adverbs there are per song and then publish your count, it doesn't matter that it's a pirate CD. The tally of adverbs is lawful to publish. It's not a copyright question. And then there's the publication itself, right? That's what a model is. It's a literary work. Software is a literary work that you publish. And it contains the insights gleaned from counting the works. You know, that is lawful to publish in the same way that a bibliography is lawful to publish, right? A bunch of facts about copyrighted works is lawful to publish. It's lawful to publish even if the works are pirated, right? A bibliography of pirated works is not a copyright infringement. You can infringe copyright with a model. You could cause it to memorize and reproduce a copyrighted work. You could cause it to produce a derivative work of a copyrighted work that was infringing. But there are lots of things you can emit with a model that don't infringe. And we have a bedrock principle in copyright law that a device capable of sustaining a non-infringing use does not infringe copyright on its own. Your computer can infringe copyright. Your computer is not a copyright infringement. You can make a copyright infringement with your computer, but the fact that your computer can infringe copyright does not make it an infringing device. This is the basis on which we get everything from photocopiers to MP3 players. And again, it would be a far worse world if we got rid of that. So then you can say, all right, either you could say, well, doctor, you're full of shit, or actually, fine, that's how copyright works, but I'm such a good wordsmith, I bet I could write you some copyright laws that forbade training models and using them against workers without causing all this collateral damage. So there, we should do it. And I think you're wrong there too. So Disney and Universal filed a lawsuit against Midjourney a little while ago. And when they did, I got an email in my inbox because I'm on all these press lists. And this one came from the Recording Industry Association of America, the RIA. These are the ones who sued 19,000 school kids during the Napster years. And their CEO is a guy called Mitch Glazier, and he's the one who signed this memo, this press release that they sent. The RIA represents Disney and Universal in their record label capacity. They were suing in their film studio capacity, but Universal is the largest music publisher and record label in the history of the human race. So Mitch Glazier, he's an interesting character. He used to be a congressional staffer. How he lost his job is very salient to this discussion because Mitch Glazier snuck a rider into an unrelated bill that ended the ability of musicians to take back their copyrights after 35 years from their labels, which is a thing that the artists who had signed the worst deals in history, mostly black artists who signed deals in the 50s, had used to get their rights back, people who had been starving and got their rights back and were able to resell that music. And he snuck it into must-pass legislation. And when it was discovered, this sneaky thing that this guy had done, two things happened. One was that Congress convened a special session to vote again to vacate this amendment that he'd snuck into the bill. And the other thing is that he'd get hired to run the Record Industry Association of America. Mitch Glazier is not on the side of artists. He gets $1.3 million a year. Check out their IRS 990 if you don't believe me, to represent the interests of labels against artists. And Mitch Glazier signed this press release when Universal and Disney sued Midjourney, and it said, we are very disappointed because they could have licensed this content from us, and instead they took it. Because Disney and Universal and your boss in the creative fields, they don't want to end generative AI. They don't want to stop generative AI from being used. They want to use generative AI to fire you and replace you with a chatbot because they hate you for the same reason software bosses hate their programmers, because you are mouthy and you know how to do things. Right? When I was walking the picket line in Hollywood, I live in Burbank, which is, home to Disney and Universal and Warner's. I was on the picket line with the script writers. I'm not in the Screenwriters Guild. I'm in the Animators Guild in the Screenwriter Unit. But we were sympathy striking with them. So I was out picketing with them. And one of the people I was picketing with, he said, you prompt up a model the same way a script executive gives shitty notes to the writer's room. Make me E.T., but make it about a dog and put a love interest in there and give me a car chase in the third act, right? And yes, that's Air Bud. But when you ask your room full of screenwriters to make you that movie, they're just going to call you a fucking idiot suit and tell you to go back to your stupid spreadsheet so that the grown-ups can write a real movie, right? And so for them, the dream is that you can have like a world without people in it, that like you can make a screenplay by starting with whatever dumb idea you had doing lines in the bathroom at the smokehouse and key it into a chatbot and it will shit out a script. And the fact that that script is not shootable is less important than the fact that it helps you avoid ego-shattering collisions with people who know how to do things you don't know how to do. And so these people, they want to make art without artists. The same reason tech bosses want to make code without programmers. And if we were to create a new sui generis right to control training, In a world with 5 publishers and 4 labels and 3 studios and 2 companies that do all of the apps and 1 company that controls all the ebooks and all the audiobooks, they would just amend their standard contract to say, as a condition of doing business with us, we require you to sign that right over to us. What they want is not a world where your works aren't used to train a model. They want a world where they are paid, but not you, when your works are used to train a model. And so copyright is not going to solve this problem. We have monotonically expanded copyright for the last 40 years. Copyright lasts longer, covers more work, has stiffer penalties, applies to more activities. The industry, the media industry, the copyright industries, they're much larger and more profitable than they have ever been. And the share of income going to writers, to artists, to creative workers is lower than it's ever been, both in real terms and as a proportion of those inflated revenues. So how can this be? Well, it's because in a world of concentrated markets, giving a creative worker more copyright is just giving them something else to bargain away. It's like giving your bullied school kid extra lunch money. It doesn't matter how much lunch money you give your school kid. The bullies are going to take it. And so what can we do if we want to protect the creative labor markets from our venal bosses and the venal bosses of the tech sector who dream of immiserating us? Well, it's kind of interesting because the Writers Guild showed us one way we can do it. They have sectoral bargaining. Sectoral bargaining is when all the workers in a sector bargain against all the employers in the sector and set a minimum set of contractual terms. It's been illegal since the 40s when the Taft-Hartley Act was passed. Actually, I think it was the late 30s when the Taft-Hartley Act was passed, but they were grandfathered in. The guilds in Hollywood were grandfathered in. So you know what? If we're saying, oh, we need a new law, don't make it a new copyright law. Make it a new sectoral bargaining law. Yeah, sure, your boss won't be on your side, but I tell you what, anytime you're campaigning for something and your boss is on your side, you're probably campaigning for the wrong thing. You know who would be on your side if you were campaigning for sectoral bargaining? Every worker in America, right? That's the side you want to be on. But, you know, we also have another way of resolving this. So I've been on the wrong side of the Copyright Office for 25 years. We've been fighting for my whole professional career. And for the first time in my life, I find myself in violent agreement with the Copyright Office and cheering them on because the Copyright Office has taken the entirely correct view that works generated by an AI are not entitled to a copyright. Because copyright, to use some international copyright jargon, copyright inheres at the moment of fixation of a work of human creativity. When a human creates something and fixes it in a tangible medium, like a hard drive or a piece of paper or painting, then it attracts a copyright. But the human has to do it. Remember the monkey selfie? The reason the monkey selfie guy lost the court case is monkeys don't get a copyright. Neither do algorithms. And the only thing our bosses hate more than paying us is that people take the things we make from them and sell them without their permission. And if the only way they can get a copyright on the works that they hope to sell is by paying us, they will pay us all day long. So if we're going to lean into a copyright posture about AI, let's not make it the posture that we need new copyrights for our bosses to appropriate from us. Let's make it the posture that works generated by AI are not entitled to a copyright, which means that if you use AI at the margins, if you use it to come up with 20 ideas for your column, if you're an editor who deepfakes the eyeballs of all the extras in a crowd shot so that they're looking over here and looking over there, yeah, the eyeballs are in the public domain, no one cares. You as the creative worker get to decide where and how you use it. And so long as it is primarily a work of human creativity, it won't matter. But as soon as your boss tries to replace you with an AI, they lose all ability to put a fence around the works that they've created and to extract a profit from it. And I think that's the best world.
Thank you very much. That was really excellent, really thought-provoking talk and
Thank you.
discussion. Please join me in thanking Cory Doctorow. And there
Thank you
are
very
your
much.
hearts
Very
and
kind of
yours.
you. Oh, it's lovely. Thank you. I can
Let me
just about see my
remind,
screen from here.
yeah, let me remind you that Enshittification is available from Weller Bookworks. There is a link in the chat. I'm going to turn off your screen, Cory, so people only see me. Thanks very much for being here. I got a couple announcements I'm very happy to share with people, so don't go away. So Thanks very much. I'd like to acknowledge the public support that makes evenings like this possible. We're grateful for funding from Salt Lake County Zoo Arts and Parks and from the Salt Lake City Arts Council. We're also thankful to our friends at Weller Bookworks who have Doctorow's book available. Most importantly, we're deeply grateful to our donors and supporters. Your generosity sustains public programs like this, our workshops for local educators, and the research support for graduate students and faculty that we provide. It's a challenging moment for the arts and humanities, but we remain steadfast in our mission and our belief that the humanities are essential to healthy, caring, and welcoming communities. Thank you for helping us continue that work. We have a couple really exciting events coming up this spring. First, on March 24th, we will present our annual Tanner Lecture on Human Values, delivered this year by the distinguished archaeologist David Wengrow of University College London. His lecture is entitled The Elementary Forms of Human Freedom and continues his thought-provoking work on the surprisingly complex social organizations of early humans that he started in The Dawn of Everything with David Graeber. And finally, I'm delighted to share with you a special preview of our final event of the year, Receipts Proof Timeline, How We Watch the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. Yes, we are going there. The Real Housewives of Salt Lake City is one of the most visible cultural phenomena in our city right now. We're convening a lively, thoughtful, and entertaining symposium to talk about what it means, how it reflects our community, and how it creates communities of its own through fandom, watch parties, and shared commentary. You are the first to know that tickets are now available. Please use the link in the chat, and you can reserve your tickets for the Real Housewives Symposium in April. You can find details about the Tanner Lecture, the Real Housewives Symposium, and all of our upcoming events at our website, tanner.utah.edu. Thanks very much for joining us tonight, on Zoom though it was, and we look forward to seeing you live at future Tanner events. Thanks a lot.